Lisa Taylor. I'm a research technician with the University of Saskatchewan fruit breeding program, and today I'm going to talk to you about pruning your fruit trees. So the best time of year to prune fruit trees is actually the late winter, early spring, and the reason that this is the best time is because you can see the architecture of the tree. It makes it much easier to prune things out. It's also better for healing the wounds when you make cuts because of the rapid growth in the spring. There's less carbohydrate stores in the trees at this time, so you're not pruning out too much of that. So I have some pruning equipment here with me. These are the ones that I most commonly use. These are lopping shears. I've got a hand saw right here, hand pruning saw. I've got sucketeers, which these are very, very useful, and it's important to get a really good quality pair of these that aren't going to break. I recommend using not the anvil type, but the bypass, like these right here. The anvil type tend to crush branches, whereas the bypass do a much better, cleaner cut. I also have a battery-powered version of the pruning saw, which is very handy, especially if you're doing a lot of pruning. It really saves your arms. And I have some Lysol, which I like to use to disinfect in between cuts if I'm ever cutting a tree that has any disease. It's always best to cut below the disease, but also to disinfect in between cuts anyways. Some examples of fruit tree diseases are canker in chokecherries, fire blight in apples or pears, or canker in plums and cherries. So you may come across some of this when you're pruning, so it's important to spray Lysol as opposed to bleach. Bleach works, but it is corrosive to your pruning equipment, so we recommend Lysol because it does just as good of a job. So some of the basic things you need to think about when you're pruning fruit trees is that you want to, first of all, the first 5 years you want to train the tree. You want to get some good scaffold branches going at nice angles, and then once it gets into fruit production, you want to just start doing some thinning cuts to thin out the branches to get more light and more airflow in the tree. So I'll start off showing you a couple different fruit crops and how to prune them, and we'll go from there. So today I'm going to talk to you about how to prune your apple tree. So there's a few things you want to look for when pruning apples, and one is you want to first train the tree to have a central leader or a modified leader system. So this branch right here, you can see this is the central leader that's going up here, and these branches coming directly off the trunk are the scaffold branches, and then the branches coming off of there are secondary or otherwise known as lateral branches. So some things you want to look for and remove are water sprouts, which are vigorous shoots that grow upward, and they're usually quite vertical. They're generally unproductive. They are often a source for disease, or they end up getting disease, so it's good to remove these. So some examples on this tree, there's one right here you can see shooting right up, so that's a water sprout, so you'd want to remove that. You also want to remove any branches that are at V-shaped angles. You want to go more for a 90-degree angle because this is better for supporting fruit load. It also holds up better in the wind, and V-shaped angles tend to get snow and rain collecting in them, which can cause disease. So, something like coming right out at a 90-degree angle is preferred. Anything that's too sharp of an angle, remove, or anything that's going to interfere with other branches, like this one right here is interfering with this branch. They'll eventually start to rub on each other, and that can cause damage. So those are some things you want to think about. You also want to remove any suckers coming up from the base of the tree because they're unnecessary. You don't need to have those. They take energy from the tree. And you also want to cut back some of your scaffold branches a little ways. Or in this case, with this tree, I would like to top off, do a head cut of the main central leader because the tree's getting a little bit too tall and out of control. And when my apples are ready, I'm going to have to use a ladder to pick them. So I'd rather control that central leader and keep it a bit shorter. So I'm going to start off by removing these water sprouts. Water sprouts are branches that grow directly up They don't have a purpose. They're often prone to disease, they cause shading, and they're just unproductive. They don't usually fruit. So I'm going to use sucketeers for this. One thing to note when using sucketeers is you want to have the flat side of the blade against where you're going to cut. So sometimes that requires turning them upside down if you're cutting on one side of the tree where the trunk's in the way. So you want to leave a little bit of, this is called the branch collar. You want to leave that intact. If you cut too flush to the branch, then diseases can get in. The branch collar helps keep pathogens from getting in. But you also don't want to leave too big of a stub, because then that can also heal improperly, and it can cause, especially in big branches, it can cause water sprouts to form or vegetative growth that you don't want. So right about there, and I'll just give it a cut like that. So one more thing to be aware of when pruning your apple tree is which part of the tree is where the fruit comes from, which are the spurs. So you can see these little woody branches, short branches here. Those are the fruiting spurs, and they're going to produce apples, as opposed to these big lateral buds that are just going to form leaves. So when you're pruning, you want to avoid pruning off a bunch of fruiting spurs, because that'll mean that you'll get less fruit. So that's just something to be aware of. You also don't want to damage them. When you're picking fruit, you want to be gentle and not rip them off as well. Okay, so now I'm going to cut another branch. This one here, as you can see, is interfering with this branch. In the long run, you don't want that, because eventually they're going to rub together and this will damage the tree. So this is a bit of a thicker branch, so instead of using sucketeers like I did with the water sprouts, I'm going to use these lopping shears, because it makes it much easier. If anytime you can make it easier on yourself, that's a good thing. So once again, I'm going to leave the branch collar intact, cut just above it. Don't leave too much of a stub, but just above the branch collar. And there you go, just like that. Right here is an example of rubbing that's already occurring. You can see the branch is rubbing up here and down here. So I'm going to remove the branch right down here, since there's 2 points here that are rubbing, and it makes more sense just to cut it at the base here. Oops. Okay, so the next cut I'm going to make is I'm going to cut off this branch right here, because this is a very sharp angle. It's not ideal. It's better to have a 90-degree angle, similar to this. Anything too upright like this, it's weak. When the branch is full of fruit, it can cause the weight of the fruit to tear this branch off. So I want to remove it now before that happens. The way I'm going to remove it is, because it's a bigger branch, I'm going to use my pruning saw, and I'm going to do a 3-step cut. So first I'm going to start by cutting a notch right here, about a foot out from the main trunk. Then I'm going to cut a little bit further. I'm going to cut the whole branch off. This is a relief cut. And then once the weight from that branch is gone, then I can finish up and do my cut just above the tree branch collar. So I'm going to start right here. Go about 1/4 of the way into the branch. And then I'm going to do my relief cut. And that was to prevent the bark from tearing from the weight of the branch. And now I'm going to cut right here to finish the cut off. There, just like that. So the last type of pruning cut I'm going to talk about today is cutting suckers. So suckers are these little plants you see growing here at the base of the tree. They're actually coming from the root of the apple, and almost all apples in Saskatchewan are grafted onto a hardy rootstock. and also in most cases a dwarfing rootstock. So the apples that you're going to get from these suckers is nothing like the apples that you're going to get on your main tree, and in most cases they aren't even really very good tasting edible apples. They're like ornamental crab apples. They're just not desirable. So you want to cut them off at the base of the tree, just like this. So that you don't take over, so that they don't take over and produce fruit. That's all we're going to talk about today for pruning cuts. I still have a lot more work to do on this tree, but that's all we'll talk about today.